Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're so grateful that you all are joining us today for this very special conversation. We are excited about our guest, and we're excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. And so, as you're coming in the room, as you're joining, please drop your name in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from, uh, your location, and we'll begin in just a few minutes.
Welcome home. Yeah. Yeah. Whoa. Don't it feel good to know you always got a place? Yeah. A seat at the table that no one can take. I know that this road can't be long, but loved one, we welcome you home. Don't it feel good to know you always got a place? Yeah. A seat at the table that no one can take. I know that this road can't be long. The sound it making fire spirits so deep oppressors trying to sink our spirits. Faith that couldn't be quaked by a Mag 9. This love has never let me down. I got hope now because I've tasted and I've seen it. I promise you there's rest for all the weary, those cast out by the system. Everybody broken in a world they felt could never feel like home. Uncommon people, open your hymn. We got a new song. Welcome home.
Well, once again, good afternoon, everyone. I am Reverend Terrance McKinley, Vice President of Movement Building and Strategy at NBCDI, and I'm truly honored to be with you all today. It is a joy to be in community with each of you as we lean into a conversation that is both timely and necessary: movement building and advocacy in a polarized society. Advocacy, we know, is not something that we do just in moments of urgency. It is a way of life. It's a daily commitment to justice, to community care, and to transforming systems that have long failed Black children and families. We are gathered today at a time of deep political division and social challenge. Across the country, many of us are living and working in places where public education is under attack, books are being banned, access to healthcare and housing is shrinking, efforts towards racial equity are being actively rolled back. And yet, even in the face of all of this, we are not without hope. This moment calls us to organize with boldness, to lead with vision, and to build movements that endure. That is why today's conversation matters so deeply. We are honored to be joined by someone whose life and leadership embody the heart of this work. The Honorable Congresswoman Cori Bush is a nurse, a pastor, a mother, and an organizer. She is a fierce and faithful voice for justice who brings the truth of people into the spaces she enters. From standing on the front lines in Ferguson to fight in Congress for evictions, protections, healthcare, and racial equity, the Honorable Congresswoman Cori Bush has shown us what it means to lead from lived experience and to legislate with compassion, courage, and conviction. Her story reminds us that lasting change is not driven by institutions alone. It is powered by communities, rooted in truth, and sustained by collective vision. So today, we will reflect on what it means to move from crisis response to visionary strategy. We will explore how storytelling, Afrofuturism, and intersectional organizing can shift both culture and policy. And we will consider how to remain grounded and hopeful and powerful in the ongoing fight for justice. So thank you all once again for being here. Thank you for your commitment to Black children and families. And thank you for being a part of this movement of a more just and loving and liberated future. And with that, I'm going to invite the Honorable Congresswoman Cori Bush. And we're so excited to have you.
All right.
There we go.
Oh, thank you for
Good
having me.
afternoon. We are so glad to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. And and so we want to begin by acknowledging that this moment requires bold leadership, visionary organizing, and deep-rooted advocacy, especially for our children, our communities, and our future. And Congresswoman, your journey embodies all of that. Let's begin by grounding our conversation in your story. You often describe your journey into politics as being called by the moment, not by ambition. And I'm wondering if you can say what it means to you, what it meant to you to move from the streets of Ferguson to the halls of Congress, and what stayed the same for you and about your leadership in both spaces, and what had to shift.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. I always like to share my story of how I, went from, community work to being in the House of Representatives because so many people believe that my story shouldn't be the story. This is not how you get to Congress. Just being a regular everyday person, you have to be of a certain family, you have to, have gone to certain schools, you have to be an attorney. But for me, I was a single parent, and just trying to survive every day. After Michael Brown was killed, like you said, during the Ferguson uprising, we took to the streets for more than 400 days, every single day for more than 400 days. And I think out of that 400, I might have missed five or six. Um, uh, um, and so, but after those 400 days, people were saying like we have to do something to impact the policies that are fighting us pretty much. And so the community asked me to run for office. I decided to run. Um, and so being someone that was not only from the community and of the community who suffered so many of the same issue from the same issues and what I call policy violence that so many others, not only in my community in St. Louis, but across the country, face every day, being that activist and the targeting and the surveillance and all of the things we went through as being activists, being able to take that to Congress was, um, it was, it was a shock because people said it could never be. But it wasn't a shock in another way because I believe what the Lord told me to do. He told me to run and I did it. And so what it meant though was that the people had the power, which is what we believed out there on the ground during the protest. That's why we kept showing up, was because we believed that the people had the power, but the people had to use it. The people had to step into it. You can't say you have the power and then you won't act. Faith without works is dead. Put your feet to your faith. So um, once I was in Congress, though, just thinking about like all of the things that came at me, people try to pull you another way, well, you don't really want to talk about poverty, do you? You don't really want to talk about, marginalized communities, there is a different way. But for me, that was the way because it's me, it's who I am. And so I married the politician and the activist. I wasn't taking off my activist hat to be able to do the work in Congress. And so I married the two. And um, I decided when you asked about, so that's kind of what I decided to do. Um, I guess the same was I stayed Corey, but when I had to make the shift that I had to make was I couldn't be on the ground as much. What people knew me as is this person who showed up to every protest on everything, showing up, putting my feet to the ground, and I couldn't do that. But what I said when I was running for office, I said that I was going to take the people with me. And so I did. So I brought those local organizations and groups. We forget, we look at the great legacy organizations, and that's wonderful. Like we support our legacy organizations, but also there are some that are on the ground doing work that people don't talk about, that don't get a lot of funding, but they are doing really great work, touching the people where they are.
I wanted to bring them along. And so that's what I was. So that was the shift, was that that's not what you saw a lot of in Congress. And so I was able to do that.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And you talked a little bit about this in your response, but I'm wondering if I can just ask you to share a little bit more. You know, you are, it's clear that you have brought your whole self into your work, that you've been very intentional about doing that in spaces where people will often fragment themselves. And you even, allude to this where they're pressed to fragment themselves. And when I think of you, I actually think of that term that folks are using more often these days, so often these days, a multi-hyphenate, that you are a politician, a nurse, a pastor, an activist, so many different skills that you bring to your work and even to your policy making. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about how your identity in all those ways has shaped your approach to policymaking and has shaped your views or your approach on movement building.
That's a great question. It all goes back to service,
Mhm,
so whether the pastor, when I was pastoring, I was working to get people out of human trafficking on the ground
mhm,
and working with our unhoused population. That was my work. I didn't believe that the four walls was the height of my work. I believed that being out with meeting the people was was our real work. And so whether it was that or working as a nurse, just being able to pray with people, even if I wasn't praying, and even if they didn't know I was praying, being able to speak healing,
mhm.
in the room, to just be able to be a nurturing presence. And to connect people to resources that they didn't know were there, so that they could have the health care that they needed. So much of it just it was about what I needed and didn't have, or what I was looking for, throughout my journey in life. Just like I said before, being a single parent, being a survivor of domestic violence. I was left for dead by an abusive partner and evicted from my home because the abuse made so much noise. Um, I lived in my car with my two babies and my partner at the time. I've been through so many of the things, and I'm a survivor of sexual assault. And so being able to give what I needed, because I felt so left out of the conversation so often. People just making these laws that they think are good. Like, oh, we did this great job by doing X, but they would actually miss the people who they claim, who, like, this policy is supposed to impact this particular group, and it would miss the group because they were so often trying to work for, we're going to start with the middle class, and if we start with the middle class, everything the people who aren't middle class will get something. Well, you were giving us crumbs. And so for me, I had to start from the people with the greatest needs. So the motto of my office was to do the absolute most for everyone in St. Louis, starting with those who have the greatest need. And it was about the least of these. So um, being able to speak up in a way that I felt like others didn't. That was the impact that I needed to make. Um, why be in the seat? Why do the work? Why claim to represent all of our communities, and you're afraid to speak up for all of the community?
So powerful. So I want to make some connections between your work and the work of the National Black Child Development Institute. The National Black Child Development Institute, we regard ourselves as the leading think and do tank for Black children and families. For over 5 decades, NBCDI has been at the forefront of change and committed to envisioning and creating a future free from oppressive systems that disenfranchise Black communities, a world where Black children and families thrive, We at NBCDI reject deficit-based narratives that often are used to frame the experiences of Black children and families and to try to fix them rather than to focus on the systems that cause the harm. Instead, we center our work on the core belief in the inherent brilliance and the limitless possibilities of Black children and families. We recently released our latest paper entitled Afrofuturism and Systems Change, Reclaiming Mental Models for Child Wellbeing. And it introduces a bold and visionary framework that connects Afrofuturism with systems change to reimagine a world where every Black child can thrive. Our paper aims to interrogate and replace harmful mental models, which uphold inequitable systems, and it presents a tool, the Afrofuturism systems design process, to guide collective world building as we build new systems. I'm wondering if you could share a few words about the importance of systems change work from your perspective and how it contributes to building a future where Black children and families thrive.
So first, let me say that the paper is extraordinary. I read through it and I was like, yes, yes. I wish I would have had this when I was in Congress, to be able to speak so much, you know, it's so much packed into this paper. We need to give it to every member of Congress, especially every member, not even, it doesn't matter what your party is. This is, that was a really great work. So, big ups to everybody that worked, worked to make that happen. Um, you know, the importance of systems change is going to happen. The who's most directly impacted is always the question. Who does this impact? So, uh, last year, I remember that there was this bill, and the bill was a lot of stuff in this bill. People were like, "Oh, well, you know what? There's money for this and there's money for that." It's all of these. I'm not going to go into exactly what all it was, but it's money for this and it's money for that. Yes, it's not a lot, but it's something. So be happy. And when we do that, we're going to give these tax breaks. In order to do this, we have to give tax breaks to the millionaires, and we're going to cut SNAP benefits that will primarily impact Black women over the age of 55. But it's some other money there. That's why we need a systems change, because it should, in so many ways, it should not be that the people who need us the most, those that are not, due to no fault of their own, just the fact that they're human, they're in a situation where they need assistance, they need help for however long that takes, that they are the ones that we penalize. So when we're talking about food, we need food to survive. When we think about our basic needs, food, water, shelter, those things should be non-negotiable. And so I've always called that policy violence, in our communities. And so, having a systems change where we say, um, you know, big business, big corporations are not people. They're not people. So they shouldn't get to dictate, what our communities, the resources that belong in our communities. The people should, the community should be able to decide that if someone needs access to health care, we should make sure they have health care. If someone needs access to clean water and clean air, they need access to clean water and clean air. That's a basic need to survive. They need to have that. And so that systems change happens when people speak up and say, hey, this is what's happening, because you won't get anywhere if you can't articulate what's happening. This is what's happening. We have food deserts in our community. We don't have access to public transportation. We don't have internet. When you start naming the things that are the barriers in your communities, and when you have people who are in office, who are in business, who are the ones that can connect you to those things, that's the change that we need. But again, it does not happen unless there is this systems change, because nobody is going to go against, they're not just not going to go against a status quo if there is not pressure. And so this paper takes away the how, the what, do people really believe this? And it just spells it out. And it spells out, not only what is happening, but the goals, how we can make this happen. And so absolutely, I'm absolutely impressed by this. And when I think about the investments, when we talk about investments in Black maternal health, investment, there's so many areas where we need these investments, and they happen because regular people make a decision that this is a priority, and we press our local elected officials and our federal and state elected officials to do something.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. As you've seen in the paper, we outline a vision for the world that Black children deserve through our 8 essential outcomes. And these outcomes assert that every Black child is born a healthy weight, every Black child enjoys meals with vegetables, hangs out on a safe and appropriate internet, has the right to breathe clean air and drink clean water, lives and plays in a safe community, has books and toys that reflect who they are and who they can become, attends a school that affirms and expands them, and is seen as a child. And as you reflect on these outcomes, I'd be interested to hear which of them feels most urgent and which feels most transformative to you in the pursuit of equity and justice for Black children and families.
Wow. Okay, you're gonna ask me which one is most urgent. You know what? I feel like there are several of them that are the most urgent, but all of them are, all of them should be a priority. But again, going back to what I started to say about Black maternal health, making sure that our pregnant women, our pregnant folks are, that they have the health care that they need, that they have the food, that the nutrition, the exercise, the clean, a healthy living conditions. that's that's how we help to make sure that they have a healthy pregnancy and they have a healthy baby, that is not low birth weight. Giving them information on, and this is for any person, not just Black folks, but information on alcohol during pregnancy, information on smoking during pregnancy, all of the things that contribute to low birth weight babies. The momnibus in Congress was money directly that would go directly to, and has gone directly to organizations that do this work. Um, when I think about back in the day, and you don't see it anymore now. I can't even find it on the internet, which is weird, because I've looked multiple times. But I remember years ago when I was a kid, there being books. You could go to the grocery store and get a book, and it's just a workbook. You're just doing a workbook. But it was the thing where it was like, the dark was bad and the light was good, and all of these
Mhm.
images. I remember, and nobody said that something was wrong with it. It was just the book. So that, or being taught that, you go to the grocery store. I mean, not the grocery store. My parents would go to the store all the time to find us Black dolls as kids. My dad, he would say, "Your Black is beautiful. Your Black is excellent." And so he wanted us to have dolls and posters that were a reflection of who we are. We had this huge poster on the wall, the great kings and queens of Africa, and we had to learn every single one of them so we could. He wanted us to see ourselves, in excellence and greatness. So that impacts us, that impacts children, because now I see who I can be. I became a nurse because I saw a Black nurse working, even though both of my grandmothers were nurses. But I only saw them in their outfits. I never saw them working. But when I saw this Black nurse working, I said, I want to be like that. Also, but when we have Confederate statues in our communities, when we have images that tear us down, we teach something different. So that's why that's important. And I think about also food. Having healthy food in our communities where our children can go to the store and get fresh fruit, but also go to go to, just out in a community, in the community, in a garden, or just in an open air food market, and they're able to pick healthy fruits, and they get to know what these are. Like, because we don't often have that. And I know in my community there are areas where we wanted to do this, but we couldn't because the ground was contaminated. You know, something we don't
Mhm.
talk about in Black communities, but sometimes the ground is contaminated with waste. And so, but my point for that is, when I was running for office, one of the things I wanted to do, I didn't get to do, but I wanted to invest in creating a garden at every single school, starting with elementary school level all the way up through high school, making sure there was a garden in the school, a food garden, so that the children could learn how to, how to grow their own food, and but also it was there for them to eat, so no child could be hungry, because we understand what happens to children when they go to school and they're hungry. They, sometimes they have trouble paying attention, they get kicked out of class, and we know what happens after that. So I just think that there's so much you have, as part of your paper, that is just urgent. I can't pick one.
Yeah, you when you tell a story about what made you want to become a nurse and going into the store and seeing the books, and that experience resonates so much with me.
Wow.
I tell people often, the favorite photo in my Instagram feed is of my niece when she was about 7 or 8, with her natural hair holding this beautiful dark black doll and looking at her mesmerized with her natural hair. And the caption of that photo is representation matters. And it's just so true, that having books and toys that reflect who you are, it inspires Black children, and our next generation. I'm wondering if, and I want to connect this to a bit to the earlier question about systems change, and I'm wondering if you can just maybe say a word about why systems change is so critical in advancing these outcomes. Um, this vision that we have for the future for Black children and families, as opposed to thinking about it, and you've talked a little bit about this, but as opposed to thinking about it just as individual needs, but recognizing that there's a system that has to be addressed.
Yes.
And in order for us to ensure that we have lasting and equitable outcomes for Black children and families, we've got to make certain that we're addressing the system around these outcomes.
We absolutely do. And we have to make sure, one thing that I feel like not enough emphasis is put on is where following the money in our,
Mhm.
just period, following the money, because there is money that is available to make sure that no one has to sleep on our streets in vacant buildings. There, when I think about, we had some major flooding happen in our city, a few years back. And when I was talking to the school administrators, I just wanted to check in to see, if about making sure that students that were displaced because of the flooding, that we had shelter for them. And the administrators told me, well, we actually have about 1,200 children that are, they were giving me these numbers of children that were just, either, housing insecure or actually unhoused. And so when I thought about that, I'm like, you know what? Change happens when people just decide to do something. So why don't we take one of these vacant schools, and why don't we turn it into a shelter, turn it into housing, not even a shelter, turn it into housing for people that live in a district that need a home. These classrooms, turn those into apartments. We and so anyway, and so that actually happened. Like, that is in the works right now. So we have the ability to make systems change when we start following the money. So that money could have gone somewhere else. But when I noticed it, I said, we need to pull this money for this. We need to make sure we have people in place that are speaking to our issues. And it is okay to have people who have gone through the issues. I know sometimes people feel like, oh, in order to be a great business leader, you had to have had this background, or in order to be this great politician, you have to have had this background. But so often, and I'm not saying those folks can't advocate for us, but what I will say is if they can't speak to our issues, then that's a barrier. If they don't know our issues the same because they haven't gone through it. And I'll give you case in point. I had someone say, "Hey, Cori, we're working on this legislation for our unhoused community. Our children, they can't go to school when they don't have an address. We have all of these issues." So yeah, absolutely. And what they said to me is, we're going to give X amount of dollars. We're going to do these. We're going to give out these debit cards. And we had a conversation about the debit cards, and I said, so we're going to go out and give people who are unhoused on the street a debit card, and that's it. Yeah, every month, we put more money on it, but we have to give them out. And one thing that I said was, as someone who has lived unhoused, it's very hard to just take the debit card and go somewhere with, because you just can't. It's just very hard when you're unhoused, to do that. There has to be some structure. There has to be some things. There has to be some things put in place. You tell me to go to the food pantry, but they only let me come once a month. It's all of these things. If you've never been through it, that's the issue. And so, um, making sure that these outcomes are lasting, making sure that these outcomes are equitable, it begins with people who can actually speak to the issues, which is what you all can do. You're able to speak to the issues. Now we need you influencing our legislators who have the power of the pen and the purse. But we need to put people in those seats that want to listen to what you have to say. That's how we have the lasting outcomes, because we put people in place that will carry it through, put people in place who will make sure that it's not only the community doing the advocacy work, that the laws are meant to impact those who are most marginalized in our communities. And so when we know that there were laws, and I'll end on this point, laws were put in place to, that I won't say to harm us, but they were harmful. When we think about, we go back through Jim Crow and segregation, and we can take it back even further than that. There are laws that were on the books. There are still laws on the books that have been harmful to Black communities. Now we need laws on the books that impact the Black community to progress.
Yeah, I want to just ask a quick follow-up based on the way you just shared. And I'm wondering if you can, one of the things we impress upon our so NBCDI has our National Village Network located in 26 locations around the country in over 18 states and Washington, D.C. And one of the things we are always impressing upon those whom we serve is that the importance of storytelling for shifting narratives, which is what I hear you saying, right? Like, and I'm wondering, because we think of Afrofuturism as an opportunity for us to imagine a world where Black children thrive, and storytelling is a tool for resistance against this world that we're in. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of pick up on that point that you were already making about storytelling and how it's a tool, hearing the voices from those on the ground, how it can be a tool for shaping public policy and driving narrative change.
Yes. So let me start with companies. So, like, one thing that, if you research it on the internet, you'll see where there are conversations about, like, Nike. Nike does not sell shoes. Nike sells a story. So they get people to buy the shoes. If you notice their commercials, sometimes it's a ball player talking about something, and they sell the story. Just do it and all of that. I'm not promoting Nike. I'm just saying that that is what brands do. They tell a story. When um I remember being on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. There was this threat of eviction, and you spoke to it, Rev, earlier in my introduction. 11 million people were at risk for evictions during the global pandemic, and 7,000 of those people were in my district. And I was told to go home. and allow that to happen. Well, I've been unhoused myself. I know what that's like, and I don't want it for anyone else. And so I decided to protest right there on the steps of the US Capitol. It wasn't until I started to tell my story and started to tell what actually happens. Like I said before, people, oh, just go to the food pantry. Like, why are you saying you're hungry? You can just go to a pantry. Not knowing that some pantries you can only go to once a month, not knowing that when you go get you go for certain resources to certain places, you have to fill out all of this information. You have to, pretty much give them all of your personal information to get them to pay attention to you and to see if you qualify for resources, and how like degrading that can be when you're already in a vulnerable state. um, and I remember when I started to speak about some of those things, I had members of Congress come to me saying, you know what? I didn't know. Like, I didn't know that's how I didn't know. Okay, now I agree with what you're saying.
Members of Congress.
Members of Congress,
Mhm.
and so I know the power of storytelling. It's not only for those that don't know, though. It is also for people who know, who are walking through those same things, so that they can see themselves, and they can see that I am, like, nothing is wrong with me. This other person has gone through it too, and they got out, or they're trying to get out. So there is hope. So that's the power of storytelling. It changes narratives because it also says that somebody is live and real about this situation. Somebody is
Mhm.
fighting right now. Somebody's not letting this rest. So storytelling, it changes how we think, it changes how we see, it changes our perception, and it makes it very real to those that don't understand.
I want to thank you for being so willing to share your story, and other people feel seen and affirmed because you do. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about movement building, but really from our shared background. And so you and I both approach this work as people of faith. We approach the work that we do um, from a grounded, faith rooted perspective. And I'm wondering if you could take a little bit of time to talk about the emotional and the spiritual resilience that it takes in order to sustain this work and to do this work. You've spoken about your faith as a source of strength for you. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit to our audience about how you care for yourself as you do this work and carry the weight of the people that you serve and you represented and that you've advocated for, um, even when this can be emotionally draining and isolating. And I'm also wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about the practices that sustain you as you do the work that you do.
Oh, yeah. Let me just say that eh, when I made the decision, when I gave my life to the Lord, many years ago, I just knew that I had to say yes, and I couldn't focus on what I was saying yes to.
Mm.
That is what I've had to do this entire, like, over these last 30 years or more. Um, it's just always, for God I live and for God I die. I'm very clear about that because I remember how God found me. I remember how Jesus found me. I'll never forget. And I always tell people, I was the woman at the well. I know who Corey was when he found me. And he still chose to love me and to accept me, to forgive me. And I got to pay that back. I see myself every day working to pay that back, working to be who I'm called to be, because I almost died at the hands of that abuser that I told you about. He choked me and left me for dead. He thought I was dead. I woke up, I think the next day, I believe is how much time passed. But I'm still here because of a purpose. And so because I'm still here, I made it through the Ferguson uprising when many of, there are several people I know that I protested with that didn't survive. And so I'm still here. One thing that I say is that they didn't kill me. So that's why I got to keep going. I'm still here. So I think about Esther. Think about Esther. Like, for such a time as this, why are we here? And so, to all of those folks that are listening, what sustains me is knowing that um, he still has me here. He still has you here, which means that there is yet work that to be done, and there is change that can happen because we are the ones who bring it. He gives us the vision, and the provision. It's up to us to be courageous. It's up to us to be leaders. It's up to us to say his will and not my will. It's up to us to put it all on the line, and I get to walk in that every single day. And I won't say that it hasn't been crushing because, me standing up for every single person, I don't believe in anybody's supremacy. So I stand up for everyone. I believe that the black child and the white child and the Palestinian child and the Jewish child and the Hispanic child and the everybody are all of the same value. And I will speak to that. I will speak to that, and I can speak to it because I know what it was like to be devalued. I know what it's like to be the descendants of the enslaved black folks in this country on both sides of my family. I have that history on the inside of me. And so I'm able to speak to being one to want to bring peace and want to bring transformative change that helps every single person, but starting with those who have the greatest need. And here we are. So I hold on to the fact that we are here now for such a time as this. While all of this is happening, we are the ones to bring the change.
You are quoting some of my favorite verses. You got to be careful quoting verses,
Look,
it starts to stir something in you.
yeah.
I want to stay on this conversation about movement building. So many of our leaders in our network, they're listening in now. They're part of this conversation. We're excited and honored to have them today. As you well know, they are navigating an increasingly hostile environment. It is hostile because we're dealing with things like anti-Black education laws. We're dealing with book bans. We're dealing with rollbacks at the state and local level, attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, cuts to safety nets, rising authoritarian impulses and rhetoric and practices. And I wanted to know if you could say a word about how we can still remain grounded and visionary even in the midst of this polarization. And I'm going to tag this and ask just a related question. And how would you say, in the face of sort of the backlash that we're seeing, um, if you can say a little bit about sort of the power of the grassroots and key elements to building movements that are resilient and impactful, but also strategic and sustaining.
Okay. Okay. Let me go.
Now I know it's a lot, but however
Um,
you,
okay. Okay. Um, Let me see the first question. Let me go back to the first question. I think I got
how do we stay grounded when it's
think
so
right.
much
Okay.
so much polarization? Yeah.
Okay. So one way that we stay grounded with all of the polarization is when we have documented frameworks like what you have in your paper, because that's always something I can go back to say, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm working for. It's not just in my head. I can see it. This is what we're doing. It's almost like when my son was born. For those that don't know, my son was born 1 pound 3 ounces. The doctor told me, "Oh no, you're fine," and I was like, "No, something is wrong." She's like, "No, you're fine." And I went home, and within a week, I was in preterm labor, and he was born at 1 pound. Um, uh, um, But what I used to do was I would put scriptures on post-it notes, and I had them all around the wall to remind me of what God says about my kid. And so, because he was born, he was just so small. So, and that is what helped me to stay focused, and it helped me to remember my work and who I am and whose I am and what I needed to do. So do that. Keep keep the the prize, the goal, keep it in front of you. First of all, let's be able to speak it. Let it, have it so dear in your heart, so have it so much down in your soul that you can speak to it at any time, that nobody can take it from you. That is the best way, because then your actions will be what gets us to that goal. Your conversations will be with people that can get us to the goal. Where we set ourselves, the things that we say yes to and the things that we say no to will be about getting to the goal.
Mhm.
um and you had another, what was your other question?
Yeah, the other part of that was just I recognize that you have experienced sort of the backlash and the
Mm,
power of, driving movements at the grassroots. And I'm
yeah.
wondering if you can say a little bit about the key elements that you see to building movements,
Mhm.
movements that are both resilient and impactful, that are not just reactive, but are also strategic and sustaining.
Yeah. So when we pay attention to history, we pay attention to history so that uh we can have an idea of how the enemy, or those that don't want us to thrive, how they attack, how they marginalize, and we use that to help us to equip ourselves. So yes, there's the attacks on our books, attacks on education. We have seen so much of this before. How much of our conversation has been, we need a livable wage. Who's most impacted by not having livable wages? It's the Black community, but definitely Black women. When we were pushing for uh uh fighting against housing discrimination, and just in so many different ways. We look at DEI, the attacks on DEI. What they're saying to us is, we don't want diversity, we want uniformity. We don't want inclusion, we want exclusion. We want some of you to not be around the others. We want some of you to not have access like others do. We don't want equity. We want the haves and the have-nots. We want to
Mhm.
keep it that way. That's what they're saying. But we've seen this before. That's what the land grants were for. When we look at what redlining and gentrification, we understand it. So we look at it, and what we do now is, these are the tools that they've used against us before, that where we have not made enough strides, because we're still fighting for those things to be fixed. So we need people who are going to work in those areas, become expert in those areas, and then we need those people to do those things. So when I think about movement building, I think about right now, people are yelling, "Oh, we need these folks to fight harder." I'm not going to go into and call labels, because that's not what this is about. But, oh, these folks need to be working for harder, are fighting harder. These folks need to be doing this. Well, the thing is, you can't ask for your communicators to be your fighters, because
Mhm.
they're communicators. Use them for what they're good at, giving the message.
Mhm.
The people who have the money, you're asking for people who don't have money to donate, and those aren't the folks. But you have folks that have big bank accounts. Those are your donors. Use those folks to help to fund the movement. You have people who are the fighters, who will go on the front line, or who will be the ones to show up. Those folks, that's who they are. Use them as your fighters. So everybody being in their role, you have your experts that will give you the numbers, that will do the research. Have them do that. The best way to build movements is to recognize the gifts, the skills, and the talents of the people that you have working with you, and then to push in that way. have them be excellent in those areas. You teach them other areas because everybody needs to do everything. Even the president should mop a floor if need be. But you have them be ready, have them to be ready in those areas and be excellent. So then when it's time, they can just go. We can just go. And right now it's go time. And my last part of this on this point, my last point in this area. So I know there's this whole thing about Black women, we sitting it out. Black people, we sitting it out. And I get it. I get it. We've protested and marched and fought. We're tired. I get it. I get it. I lost my whole seat. I get it. But this is the thing. Yes, we may be tired, but how will we feel? How will we be? How will our children's children? What will their lives look like if we sit this out with this authoritarian, as you said, these actions, this fascist style of government happening right now? How do we expect to impact that so that our communities aren't even more devastated if we sit it out? We're the ones with the story. We're the ones with the voice. We're the ones holding the narrative about our communities. Nobody else should be speaking for us, because at the end of the day, my son, my daughter, their kids, whenever they have some, they're the ones that will have to walk out whatever we allow right now. So I love y'all. The folks that said that they sitting it out. I love you. Get what you need. Get some, get some R&R and all of that, and then get back up in the fight and fight harder than you ever have, because we cannot leave it to these folks to take care of our communities. They are destroying what we have already built. And so we have to be the ones to fight back. We can rest later. Let's take care of our communities now.
It's so powerful. And I have a couple of questions I'd love to hear your voice on, just a few more. But one in particular, you centered young people in your response just now. And I'm wondering, young people are watching, they're rising. What would you say to the next generation of activists who are on the rise right now and are stepping into organizing for the first time?
Go.
Mhm.
Go. There is no activist guru that's going to come around and say, you have just accomplished 250 hours of community work. Now you're an activist. That does not happen. You're an activist because you're active. So in whatever way that you are active. So do it. But as you do it, like, in order to ride the bike, you didn't just hop on the bike one day and now you're an expert at it, teaching other people. Even if it was just that first day, it took you a while. Got to get the training wheels off, had to figure out how to steer the bike and all of that, had to figure out what balance is like. It's the same way with this. Don't be afraid to listen. Don't be afraid to learn as you're being active so that you can be the best at what you're doing. I started out, I'm not, and this isn't my activism necessarily. This is in politics. My dad got into politics when I was around 10 years old. I started working on campaigns at 10 years old. And by the time I was 18, I had worked every part of a campaign. So I knew how to volunteer. I was a candy striper at a hospital. I did so many different volunteer jobs. But I was able to take that and then be so much more advanced. So, I could do so much more because I had a knowledge where I was at. I spent time on the ground learning, as I was walking through it. So yes, go. Don't let someone tell you that you're too young, that you don't have what it takes and all of that. You take what it takes. Educate yourself, dig into the history, dig into the books, dig in and find people who are speaking to whatever it is that you're trying to work towards. Find those folks and connect with them and learn and still do the work. I'm learning as I go as well. We're all always learning, but we need you because you all are the ones that are going to be still fighting if we don't get this done. So we are working for you and your history, you and your legacy. And you got to work for your own and those that are coming up after you. We need our young people.
Awesome. I've got two more questions.
Sure.
The last one I'm going to leave open-ended for your word to those who are serving in communities and showing up in classrooms and city council meetings and community centers every day. Whatever your final word is to them is I'm going to leave as the last question. But the one question I really want to make certain that we don't end this conversation without me asking, and that is this: what is it that even in this environment gives you hope and sustains you as you continue to go forward and advocate for those who are closest to your heart? And how do you hold on to that hope?
Yeah, it's the people who are continuing to fight. It gives me hope. It gives me hope. Um, you know, every time I wake up in the morning and I still have this heart to fight, um, that's hope because, first because I woke up and I'm still here. So if I'm still here, that means they're still fighting me. Um, Seeing the resistance. When you touch power, power touches back, and so one thing that I've been facing a lot over the last couple of years is just all of these attacks from the highest levels of government, just attacking me directly and personally in ways that I would have never imagined. But as much as it hurts and it's confusing, but because it's like, like, why do I have to go through such like pain and this, and the smears and such? But what it says to me is it's because you have power and they want to silence that. They want to stop that. And they know the way to get to the people is to go to who the people trust and get those folks. So I have hope because we are making change every single day. You all at NBCDI have made the decision that Black families and Black children deserve to be a priority. And there is another group that believes that um, that we should make sure that our focus is prioritizing clean water and clean air. There's another group that believes that we should be prioritizing public transit. There's another, so all of it works together. And so the fact that you all have made this decision that this is your work, that gives me hope. It gives me hope that everybody, that so many different, different groups are doing different things and it all benefits our communities. And to those that are showing, oh, and let me say, I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I would be nowhere without the Lord. And so that that is how I wake up every morning and go to bed at night with that comfort. But to those showing up at the different meetings, to those that are using their voices, you know that there's a possibility that you're putting your body on the line or your livelihood, and you continue to make the decision to go. Thank you. Thank you because you are the reason why you feel compelled is because that's what you were created to do. Be okay with that. It may not look like what someone else is doing, and that's okay because it's not their calling. You do what you've been called to do. And when you feel that burning on the inside of you, you feel compelled to continue to show up. That's who you are. And when you stop, that's how the people who want to silence us, the people that want to make sure that Black children and Black families don't have our needs met in a very basic way. That's how they win. When there is no pressure, when there is no storytelling, when we aren't in those spaces where power is moving, they're making laws, they're making decisions that impact us directly, and we're just not doing anything. No, you showing up, you're speaking for millions of people when you show up. You don't know them, but you're speaking for them, because how many people are not there? Millions. But who's impacted? The millions. So when you show up, you're showing up to bring about transformative change, even if it hurts you, even if it is uncomfortable. You are doing the work you are supposed to be doing, and you're standing up for somebody who cannot do the same. So continue to go forward and just keep asking, you know, give me the download for how I'm supposed to do this today. One thing to not do as an activist is to think how I did this other thing is the way I should do this thing. New wine in a new wine skin. Make sure you are in the moment, you are in timing, and bring all of that fight and that courage, that moxie, everything that you got, bring it to the table.
Congresswoman Cori Bush, I cannot thank you enough for your passion, for your brilliance, and for your courage, and for you sharing these moments with us at NBCDI. We are truly grateful. To everyone who is joining us today, we're so grateful that you all were a part of this conversation. But I want to just take an opportunity once again to salute you, the Honorable Cori Bush. We're so grateful to have had the chance to share these moments with you today.
It was great to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you for the questions. Thank you for all of the work and the advocacy. Shout out to NBCDI. Thank you all so much.
All right. Again, we want to thank everyone for joining us for this critical conversation. We're so grateful to all of you. We're so grateful to the Honorable Congresswoman Cori Bush for being with us. And we're especially grateful to our village leaders. Village leaders, we have a very special conversation prepared to have with you immediately following this time. Want to direct you to your email where you will find an additional Zoom link. If you click that link, it will bring you into the room for a very special conversation. To everyone, we're so grateful once again for your attending, and we look forward to seeing you soon.